respected dignitaries, speakers, and participants. A very good afternoon. We have had a wonderful start to the 6th SIU AIU International Conference on Internationalization of Higher Education. The day began with the inaugural session, which was followed by Track 1. Track 1 highlighted the need for advancing South-South-North dialogues in IHE. I take this opportunity to welcome you to Track 2 of the conference. The theme of Track 2 is Advancing Inter-Regional Cooperation in IHE and East-East and ASEAN Perspective. We look forward to a very interesting and thought-provoking discussion given the potential of the region. Let me begin by introducing the chair of the track. Dr. Rajni Gupte is Vice Chancellor of Symbiosis International Deemed University, an academic with over 40 years of experience in teaching, research, and administration. She has extensive experience as an institution builder. She has received several accolades for her contribution to education. She has been appointed as a member of the Western Zonal Committee for Implementation of the National Education Policy 2020 by UGC and is also a part of Niti Aayog's think tank of eminent economists. Welcome to the session, ma'am. Our speakers today are eminent experts in the area of internationalization of higher education. I have the pleasure of introducing each one of them to all of you. Dr. Jamil Salmi is a global tertiary education expert providing policy advice to governments, universities, professional associations, multilateral development banks, and bilateral cooperation agencies. In the past 25 years, Dr. Salmi has provided advice on tertiary education development and strategic planning to governments and university leaders in more than 100 countries all over the world. Welcome to the conference, Dr. Salmi. I extend a very warm welcome to Dr. Roger Chow, our next speaker. Dr. Roger Chow is currently Assistant Director, Head of Education, Youth and Sports of the ASEAN Secretariat. Since 2013, he has been engaged in the international education development sector in various capacities and in various organizations, including UNESCO, UNICEF, the European Commission, DAAD, and the British Council. Our next speaker is Mr. Darren McDermott. Mr. Darren has lived and worked in Asia for much of the last 20 years, predominantly within the higher education and international development sectors. Mr. Darren has worked on numerous EU Commission-funded education development and capacity building programs with ASEAN member states' ministries of education and their higher education institutes. Mr. Darren is currently team leader of European Union support to higher education in the ASEAN region, SHARE program. Welcome, Mr. Dermott. With this introduction, I'm sure you know that you have a lot of food for thought which will come your way during the session. I hand the session over to the chair, Dr. Gupte, and request ma'am to take it forward.
Thank you, Madhvi. Thank you so much. Greetings to all the speakers and the participants of this session. A very warm welcome to the speakers in this session. It's indeed a pleasure to have the opportunity to listen to and interact with so many experts from across the globe. And that's the reason why all of us at Symbiosis look forward to this annual conference. So to get started with this session, all of us are aware that traditionally, internationalization of higher education was almost synonymous with student mobility, with students from the South traveling to seek education in universities of the North. The WTO in the GATS document referred to this as Mode 2, which is consumption of services abroad. However, in the last few decades or so, several changes are visible in the export of education services. Let me list them. One, many countries in the South have also strategically created their own national higher education policies, which leverage their own strengths. For instance, Singapore leveraged its location advantage to become an education hub. Or China, which is most well known for the large number of students studying overseas. But what is not often known or noticed is that even as early as 2005, China had 150,000 international students at their various universities. And by 2018, there were around 500,000 international students from 196 countries enrolled in China. And over 2,000 programs were available in English language. The largest number of international students in China are from South Korea, Japan, United States, Vietnam, and Indonesia. So whether it is Malaysia, Indonesia, or Australia, each nation has attracted international students, but has also realized the importance of collaboration. Initially, they were often twining or articulation agreements where institutions with mutual interests were looked after. The point that is relevant is that the flow of students is now no longer only from the South to the North. The second point, the other modes of export. I spoke initially about consumption abroad, that is students going overseas to study. But the other modes of export of education services through cross-border consumption using technology or setting up commercial presence overseas, which were earlier not very common, are also gaining prominence. Also, the movement of faculty to deliver education services abroad has become easier with collaborative networks being created. But again, these were mostly between institutions in the South and the North. The last trend that I will refer to is interregional collaboration, which originated in the EU and has slowly been gathering strength across the globe. And regions that are geographically or culturally close to each other are looking at collaborations. In fact, in the pre-conference roundtable yesterday, we spoke about the role of networks and collaboration and heard the experiences from across the globe. And today, in the first track, we focused on South-South North collaborations. In this track, we now turn our attention closer home, East-East and ASEAN collaborations. As universities respond and adapt to globalization and internationalization, there is an emerging trend towards new global regionalism in the East and in the ASEAN region. In this new landscape, we may see stronger partnerships, particularly relevant to international student mobility, study abroad programs, transnational higher education, and the accelerated movement of research in science and technology among regional universities, also with businesses and government agencies. I'm sure that our esteemed speakers on this panel, with their very vast experience, will share their insights and thoughts on some of these aspects today. May I now request Dr. Jamil Salmi to address the delegates. Dr. Salmi, over to you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, esteemed colleagues. It's really a great honor to participate again in the international conference organized by Symbiosis International University. I wish we could all be together in Pune and benefit from the fantastic and generous hospitality that I had the pleasure to experience a few years back. But it's also very nice to be able to work through this virtual mode. If you allow me, I'm going to share my presentation. I would like to thank you for the opportunity to share with you the results of a study that I did on behalf of the World Bank a few months back, looking at the present state of regional collaboration in higher education in the South Asia region, and trying to think about options and paths and opportunities for ramping up, scaling up these instances of collaboration towards a better integration of higher education in the region as it happens in other parts of the world. For those of you who are medical doctors, you may know that you would know, of course, that rotavirus until 2006 was a very bad disease provoking diarrhea among children all over the world. And then a kind of miracle happened. In 2006, a vaccine was developed for the first time. And the reason I take this disease as an example is that the vaccine was invented by Indian scientists working together with researchers in the US. So you had, on the one hand, researchers at the All India Institute of Medical Sciences and the Indian Institute of Science in Bangalore, working with colleagues at the NIH, National Institutes of Health in the US, and Stanford University. And to develop this vaccine, they created, with help from the Microsoft, from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, a new Indian company, Bharat Biotech, that produced the vaccine. And I think that's such an important and good example of what collaboration in higher education is about. My purpose today is to focus on 3 dimensions. First, remind ourselves why it is so important to cooperate, to collaborate, not only generally, but in the field of higher education. And then look at ongoing experiences in the South Asia region, and finally make a few suggestions about the way forward. So we are all aware of the many benefits of collaboration. We realize increasingly that our planet is facing global and regional issues that cannot be effectively addressed by any single country, even a huge country like India. Second, we have found that to build institutional capacity, it is the best way to do it is to work through mutually beneficial partnerships. And as countries grapple with the needs to build up their research capacity, many of the smaller countries realize that it is impossible to set up all the scientific capacities to build a critical mass of researchers just on your own. And while this is true in South Asia, it's even truer in other regions where I work, which is sub-Saharan Africa. And let me share just a few examples of such scientific issues that really require regional, if not global, solution. Well, we have been living it for the past 2 years with COVID-19, obviously, but even before, with the SARS epidemic, with Ebola in Africa, with Zika in South America, solutions are found much quicker if we work together. Then there is the whole issue of climate change and the increasing number and strength of natural disasters that is affecting our planet. And another obvious example is the issue of water flows. Today, on our planet, we have 214 rivers that flow from one country to the other, sometimes to many more countries. We can think of the Nile River in Africa, for example. I was mentioning the COVID-19 epidemic that really put the world at a standstill in March 2020. If you look at the graph, already a month later, by April 2020, the number of collaborations all over the planet to understand the disease better and to start finding medication that would work or to work towards a possible vaccine was already involving scientists, researchers from all over the world. And you can see on the graph that South Asia was already heavily involved in these activities. To build scientific facilities, it's also very important to pool our resource. I think perhaps the most emblematic example is that of CERN, the particle accelerator in Switzerland, which has a diameter of several kilometers going underground across France and Switzerland. If you've never visited that place, it's amazing. And there we have scientists from all over the world collaborating, working together. But without going too so far, as you know, the CGIAR, the research institutes in the agricultural field, which are disseminated in all over the planet, in several countries, when we have two centers, one in India and one in Sri Lanka, that exemplifies this kind of international collaboration, scientific collaboration for the benefit of entire humanity. I was mentioning the Africa sub-region. Many African countries are very small, especially in Western Africa, the Sahel countries. They have very limited resources. But still, progress has been immense as a result of a project supported by not only the World Bank, but many other donor agencies, with the idea that to build a graduate studies capacity and research capacity, instead of having each country establishing its own center at a high cost and with limited human resources, these countries will pool their resources and establish regional centers of excellence that would cater to the needs not only of the country where they are located, but of the entire region. And many of these centers have become very strong. I can mention, for example, in Nigeria, the Redeemer University, which is a private university with a leading edge research capacity in the health area. They were very active during the Ebola epidemic, and they've been at the forefront of the fight against COVID in the past 2 years. Now, what is the situation in South Asia? Unfortunately, the regional collaborations and cooperation, although it exists, is not as advanced as in other parts of the world. In my study, I did a little bit of benchmarking, not only with Western Europe as a result, or Europe in general as a result of the Bologna process. But if we look at Southeast Asia, and I'm sure that my two colleagues on the panel, Darrett and Roger, will talk to that because this is a part of the world that really has done a lot. One of the challenges is that by tradition, and this was outlined by the chair of our panel, that we tend to look to the north traditionally for our collaborative initiatives and partnerships. The example I gave at the beginning about rotavirus was between India and North America, and generally most universities in the region still try to develop these partnerships or privilege these partnerships with Europe or North America, and to a lesser extent, in the case of South Asia, with East Asia and the Pacific, Australia, New Zealand. Plus, as you know better than me, unfortunately, the region is facing political tensions, and that, of course, impedes the development of collaborative endeavors that could bring South Asian higher education systems and institutions closer. But we have very important exceptions that need to be celebrated within the context of the SARS. There is a policy framework that allows for the pursuit of collaboration through the University Grants Councils or the Higher Education Commission in the case of Pakistan. There has been an active dialogue that has, of course, slowed down or almost come to a standstill as a result of the pandemic. But that was a framework that allowed for conversations and actions in terms of collaboration for higher education. And then we have two emblematic examples, the South Asian University in Delhi that cater to the entire region. And earlier, 20 years ago, we had the launch of the Asian University of Women in Bangladesh that has also achieved very impressive results. More recently, the World Bank launched a project called the HEAT regional project that at the beginning involved only Bangladesh and Afghanistan, but is open to other countries in the region to join for collaborative work to build up the research capacity, teaching, and also reaching out to society in the respective countries. Now, what is more important, if we want to take an optimistic view, is to think together how we can scale up these activities. What is the way forward? And again, remind ourselves that it makes so much sense because everybody benefits to improve the quality of academic programs, their relevance, to achieve better learning outcomes for the students involved, mastery of foreign languages, and I think also very important from a cultural viewpoint, exposure to other cultures, which hopefully leads to a more tolerant and open-minded worldview. And I don't need to convince you because Symbiosis International University really embodies its spirit and has been a leader in this respect, in offering opportunity to have students from all over the world learn and live together and learn from each other. In my study, I looked at the possible modalities. I will not spend much time on this, but just to mention each one of them very rapidly, multi-campus universities, and I've already outlined that South Asia is a leader in this respect. Something that is less frequent in this part of the world are branch campuses, much more available in Southeast Asia. Academic mobility, but as we know from the pandemic, all of a sudden academic mobility doesn't need to be elitist activity reserved to people who have resources, but that virtual modes of international mobility can really open new avenues, and we can come back to that during the conversation. Joint delivery of instruction, which again can be presential on campus, but through virtual and mirror classes, we can have many more opportunities through the platform, the virtual platforms that now exist. Joint research projects, professional networks for academics and higher education institutions, the development of regional quality assurance and accreditation associations and networks. And here again, East Asia has been a pioneer. Recognition of qualifications through networks and associations. And last but not least, strategic partnerships and alliance, bringing together universities from 2 countries or even a larger number of countries. What are some of the enablers? And I think that in the South Asia region, you are in a much better position than other regions. For example, from the point of view of language, the English language is much more prevalent in your region than in other parts of the world. When you work in Africa, for example, you have countries that use Arabic, others that look French, English, Portuguese, or even Spanish in the case of Equatorial Guinea, and that creates barriers. It's a potential advantage, but in the beginning, it can make life more complicated. I have already alluded to the importance of ICT as an important enabler, And in that way, the pandemic has had a positive impact in forcing us to explore many avenues that we had not necessarily looked at before. And I want to insist also on open science, open education, open publications as a way to work together as an enabler. And again, the COVID-19 pandemic has had has put the impulse to more use, more focus, and more reliance on these new open approaches. So to conclude my brief presentation, I want to remind us that collaborations can have a great impact, and we know there are so many examples. And while recognizing that Europe and Southeast Asia have been pioneers, other regions, Africa and South Asia, have made progress in recent years. And I believe that the good examples that exist already in the region can be built upon, and that there is a lot of room for expansion. I want to quote from this novelist, Siddharth Pico Lear: "The best reason to go to college is to learn that the world is more than the issues that divide us." I think this is very profound, very important, and as a driver of our efforts for regional collaboration. And I take hope in this incredible achievement that I would never have thought to be possible. You may have heard about SESAMI. It's a synchrotron light for experimental science and application in the Middle East. It's the first particle accelerator in that region. And if you look at the list of countries that are together in there, you will see Egypt, Iran, Israel, Jordan, Pakistan, the Palestinian Authority, and Turkey. And as we know, many of these countries are either fighting each other or, in the best case, have very lukewarm relationship. And yet, model after the CERN Center that I mentioned earlier, this institution is now up and running. So I think it gives me hope that even in region where you have strong political tensions, a lot of positive developments can happen. And I think the solution for South Asia is to forget the political channels that are much more difficult and work through the professional channels. And here donor agencies can help as convening power, and also offering financial and technical support to facilitate these initiatives. And I'll finish with this picture. You may remember only a few days after the brutal invasion of Ukraine by the Russian army, we still had these pictures of collaboration with the Russian cosmonauts meeting their US colleagues, because science has no frontiers, science doesn't know wars. So I think we should remain hopeful. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much, Dr. Salmi. It's always a pleasure to listen to your very insightful remarks. And as you said, we would have loved to have you here on campus, but I hope that will happen next year. You mentioned the collaboration of Indian scientists and researchers from Stanford and NIH, which led to extraordinary results. That was truly a great impact of collaborative work. And also the pooling of scarce resources will, of course, be a great advantage. You highlighted that there is scope to do more with all the exceptions that you highlighted. So thank you so much for your comments, and I will come back to you later with some questions. May I now request Dr. Roger Chow to take the discussion forward.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hani. Thank you very much, Jamil. You actually set the tone of my focus, particularly that the world is more than issues that divide us, and there is significant room to collaborate, and that science knows no boundaries. Okay. My talk will focus particularly on frameworks and structural developments that leads towards international collaboration in higher education. Starting point is that the world has actually changed. from a global order dominated by the North towards a more regional order with regions taking charge and actually collaborating and doing discussions both at economic, political, or even cultural and sociological dimensions. In the Southeast Asian region, the same thing has happened. Southeast Asia, or particularly the ASEAN region, has been considered the second most successful regional integration project in the world, second only to the European Union. Although the foundations of its regional integration project is totally different from the EU, it has been seen to be successful in certain aspects. In terms of higher education, however, Southeast Asia, ASEAN in particular, has been a little bit slow until the recent decade. Most of the initiatives are driven by member states and most particularly by dialogue partners, particularly because of funding issues. We have to consider that in international political economy and international relations, it's mostly driven by national policies, foreign relations policies, and basically outside of competition, but collaboration in terms of friendly neighbors and who are your friends among international relations arena. In particular, international mobility in Southeast Asia has been very slow. In fact, I've written about 2 or 3 articles that focusing that there's a significant need of intra-ASEAN mobility. And similar to the discussion on track 1, when there's a movement from the global south to the north, Southeast Asia as a region had the least or less the developing countries moving towards the developed countries within the region. And if we go beyond Southeast Asia, similarly goes to the Northeast Asian countries, where you have Southeast Asian countries moving towards more developed countries such as Japan and Korea, but more recently also towards China. But that's also because of significant funding coming from the Chinese government. So considering these aspects, a lot of collaboration beyond outside of higher education has been driven by national priorities and foreign policies. The development of regional and regional structures such as ASEAN, the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation and the various ASEAN-led or ASEAN Plus frameworks, such as the ASEAN Plus 3, which includes Korea, China, and Japan. And if we go to the East Asian Summit with the inclusion of Australia, India, New Zealand, and eventually the US and Russia, it complicates things and has an overlaying hierarchy of regional structures. Although it is still centralized, or there's an ASEAN centrality, the rationale behind it is because they are not actually the driving force, but rather serves as the cohesive force in the region. So as such, higher education in ASEAN has mostly been driven by national directives and goals, particularly for those developed countries, but also driven by global agendas and dialogue partners through funding mechanisms. However, Darren will talk about it on the next, after me. EU share has been substantial in developing the higher education space and internationalization of higher education in the ASEAN region. As we all know, the European higher education area has been a work in progress since 1998, in spite of the fact that it has been declared, I think sometime 2010, if I remember right, that it has been a European higher education area. The process is still ongoing and it's not fully developed. It has not completed its evolution. However, this has served as a basis to develop what is an ASEAN higher education space, which is primarily going to be a focus of the ASEAN Secretariat and the ASEAN member states over the next few years, of course, through the support of the EU Share program. Now, why do we have to collaborate and how do we collaborate? As Jamil earlier said, it's not only governments that collaborate. We have universities that collaborates with other universities in the region. We have academic networks, discipline-based research networks, and we have association of universities. As such, we have to look at the ASEAN University Network with its network of universities within the Southeast Asian region and its thematic networks is actually a very good example of a structural foundation or organization that contributes to enhancing internationalization of higher education across regions. Its academic networks within the ASEAN University Networks also collaborate with other regions, other universities. Its member universities provides the link with other universities within or outside the region through thematic or through relationships across universities. Furthermore, I believe that association of universities talking to other universities, association of universities in other regions would provide an alternative channel outside of the usual nation state or national driven structure where the focus would be economic development, foreign policies. Here, the focus of association of universities will be academic development, stronger international ties, discipline-related research, and basically developing the sector. So we have to look beyond the box, although it's still structured within traditional hierarchies. Association of universities actually contributes to a very strong foundation for inter-regional collaboration. As Southern Theory always mentioned earlier, a few decades ago, we talked about that it's not only the North who contributes to the knowledge or processes, it's also the South. We don't consider it's ourselves South because even in our own respective countries, there are the better universities and the developing universities. So even within our countries, we have something to learn. So we both learn from, the North can learn from the South, the East can learn from the West, and the South can learn from both. So we all learn from each other. Yeah. So beyond that, I would like to say that the move forward should be to look at alternative channels, just as Jamil mentioned earlier, beyond traditional government-led channels. We should actually look at the capacity of faculty and universities and association of universities to enhance networking, promote joint research, joint development of programs, joint delivery, and of course use ICT, particularly as seen in during the past 2 years with the global pandemic. Take note that the use of ICT in higher education is not only during the pandemic. It has been used in some countries for more than 2 decades, if I remember right. However, we have to consider that the world has changed not only in terms of structures, but also in terms of going digital. So we have to transform the higher education sector and including utilizing ICT and the ecosystem to evolve how we actually collaborate and enhance internationalization of higher education within the region, across the region, and with other regions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Chow. Thank you so much for your comments on the framework and structures for economic and higher education collaborations, and also the complications that arise from their hierarchy. You also refer to the use of ICT, which is becoming extremely important in the background of the pandemic that we have witnessed in the last few years. I'll come back to you again with questions as they come along. May I now request Mr. Darren McDermott to address the participants.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, Dr. Rajani Gupta, Vice President of Symbiosis International, colleagues, distinguished participants. It's a pleasure to have the opportunity to join this conference hosted by Symbiosis International University and the Association of Indian University, should I say. Today, I'd like to provide a bit of an overview of the EU support to higher education in the ASEAN region. program, which has been running since 2015, and some of the activities that we have been and will continue to implement with our partners across Southeast Asia. So I'm just wondering if it would be possible to have my slides on the screen. That's brilliant. Thanks a lot. Yeah, I think it's really interesting what we're doing today. I believe Dr. Jamil is in South America. I know Roger is in Jakarta, and I'm joining you from Dublin, Ireland. The opportunities for the global higher education community of practice to collaborate, and I suppose the impetus to collaborate is greater than ever before. I'm the team leader of the SHARE program, and the SHARE program is a partnership between the EU and Southeast Asia. And this year, if we could just move to the next slide, this year marks the 45th anniversary of the EU's dialogue partnership with the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN. So the EU and ASEAN have consolidated a very long-standing relationship by becoming strategic partners. And this is reflected in the breadth and depth of cooperation between the two regions. It's seen the EU become ASEAN's most comprehensive partner. And in February, there was a meeting of the EU-ASEAN Joint Cooperation Committee. Both sides reaffirmed their commitment to regionalism and a rules-based order, multilateralism, as well as respecting and promoting international law and internationally agreed norms and standards in line with the UN Charter. And such cooperation is all the more important in the current geopolitical context. Both sides also welcomed the success of projects enhancing people-to-people connectivity between and within the regions, and welcomed the flagship higher education cooperation program, the SHARE program. So the SHARE program is implemented by a consortium, and it's comprised of the British Council, the DAAD, or German Academic Exchange Organization, NOFIC, the Netherlands International Education Agency, and the European Association for Quality Assurance in Higher Education. Just move to the next slide, please. So SHARE's overarching objective is to strengthen regional cooperation and enhance the quality, competitiveness, and internationalization of ASEAN higher education. It has drawn on the experience of the Erasmus program, which in turn led to a critical mass, resulting in the initiation of the Bologna process, and then the subsequent creation of the European higher education area, which, as Roger alluded to, is still very much a work in progress. Since 2015, SHARE has engaged concertedly with partners in Southeast Asia, the ASEAN Secretariat, the Southeast Asian Ministers of Education, regional organizations, and higher education partners. And coinciding with the 50th anniversary of the 50th anniversary of ASEAN, SHARE received endorsement by the 10 ASEAN heads of state at their meeting in Manila. So SHARE is very much involved in the development of frameworks within ASEAN, within Southeast Asia. And this has led to the formalization of the ASEAN Working Group on Higher Education Mobility. And this group of permanent representatives from ministries and other stakeholders are working towards the development of a sustainably funded ASEAN scholarship ecosystem, and ultimately an ASEAN higher education space. So we're working on a roadmap at the moment, and an implementation plan, which will be launched later this year. And this will really set the agenda up to 2025 on the development of this ASEAN higher education space. And it's the vision of the SHARE program consortium that over the course of the remainder of our program, which unfortunately does end later this year, that we can be a catalyst for ASEAN's ownership, sustainability of a collaborative, accessible, and inclusive ASEAN higher education space. So I'd now like to look at some of the recent milestones and our future plans within SHARE's 3 result areas. And if we just move to the next slide, we'll look at result area 1, which is under the management of the British Council and focuses on the overall program management, stakeholder engagement, and policy dialogue. So we work, as I've mentioned repeatedly, closely with ASEAN stakeholders and partners. And have contributed to the development of the higher education components of the ASEAN Work Plan on Education 2021 to 2025. Many of these components are discussed at policy dialogue, and including the dialogues with the ASEAN Working Group on Higher Education Mobility at a policy level, but then at a practitioner level, SHARE has launched the ASEAN Higher Education Harmonization Community of Practice. And this is made up of institutional academics, institutional leadership and staff. It's a really inclusive process, which looks to get a sense of what are the key issues in ASEAN higher education. SHARE has gathered stakeholders together at policy dialogues. Needless to say, during the COVID-19 pandemic, it has been difficult to bring together the community. When I joined as team leader, within 3 weeks, the World Health Organization declared a pandemic. So we were confined to online communication for much of the last couple of years. But I'm pleased to say we've recently had our 14th policy dialogue, and we were able to meet in a hybrid format in Bangkok in partnership with colleagues from the Southeast Asian Ministers of Education Regional Center for Higher Education Development and UNESCO, also the ASEAN University Network, which Roger mentioned. And you can see Roger and myself sitting side by side here with the Permanent Secretary of Higher Education and the leaders of CMIO RIHED and the ASEAN University Network. So we do hope that we can gather together more often now that it looks like things are improving. Just move to the next slide, please. So the overall objective of Result Area 2 is qualifications frameworks and quality assurance. And this is to strengthen existing regional higher education qualifications and quality assurance frameworks, supporting their implementation and dissemination on a national level. And this is led by our colleagues at the DEA and ENQA. A master plan on ASEAN connectivity study on graduate employability is also being led by the DAD. And this is looking at the contribution of student mobility to employability. And significant work is being done on outcome-based education in the region. So a key regional partner then of quality assurance in the region is the ASEAN Quality Assurance Network, and this is currently chaired by the Malaysian Qualifications Agency. Moving on to the next slide, we'll look at Result Area 3, which is centered on student mobility and credit transfer. And since 2015, more than 550 scholarships have been dispersed to ASEAN students to pursue their studies abroad. And the primary focus of that has been on intra-ASEAN credit-bearing mobility. We're also implementing or have implemented a credit transfer system, the ASEAN Europe Credit Transfer System. Now, another area, and perhaps the area of the program that was most significantly affected by the pandemic, because as we all know, there was no real student mobility happening over the last couple of years. So we as a program really needed to adapt and initiate work on virtual modalities and online modalities of international education. So we've looked very closely at virtual exchange and collaborative online international learning. And then coupled with that, and in line with developments happening in the EU on the European Digital Credentials for Learning framework, we've looked at 2 studies on the digital transformation of ASEAN EU, the ASEAN EU credit transfer system. And these are backed up with ongoing workshops, capacity development. We're just about to implement our second batch of the virtual exchange COIL scholarships, and we're now hoping that the complementary digill credentials framework will come in and feed into that. So this is just a sense that the region hasn't stood still. It's really kept pace with development in the sector, and I think as Dr. Jamil noted, it's a much more inclusive approach to international education. So just because one of the primary aspects of internationalization has been removed or taken off the board, so to speak, doesn't mean we give up. I think now more than ever, we need to be looking at ways to collaborate as we are in this wonderful conference. If we look at the next slide, then, so we're really proud of our alumni. 500, in excess of 500 of them from all over Southeast Asia, who've really embraced the opportunity to study within the region. And traditionally, this would have not been the case, but we're seeing a renewed appetite for ASEAN students or Southeast Asian students to study and work alongside their counterparts in other ASEAN member states. So if we just look at, I wanted to try and address some of the questions posed in the session overview, and I've chosen three, which I'd like to address. So the first of these on the next slide is why is geography specific approach to intra and interregional cooperation required? Those who know me would know that I often use this graphic, but I've used it in the context of internationalization as to, well, what is internationalization? I suppose it depends on where you're sitting and how you might answer that question. But I think it's relevant to international cooperation at large. And the question has been posed, well, is geography destiny? And we often see that through a geopolitical lens. If anything, the geography that's most relevant to us is the world we share. And if COVID-19 has taught us anything, what affects one region can pretty soon affect all regions. Geographical boundaries, either political or geographical, that they don't count for much in this context. So COVID-19 was a global wake-up call. We realized that looking inwards and focusing solely on our own national or institutional context will result in catastrophic myopia and ignorance. Internationalization, inter and intra-regional multilateral cooperation and rules-based order are the active ingredients of a vaccine that can inoculate humanity against this. Climate change is the elephant in the room now, and we really need international, interregional, intra-regional cooperation at all levels for us to get the full picture on how we address this. Universities are very well placed to lead for societies on such crucial exchange of knowledge, people-to-people connectivity, and this point was far more comprehensively unpacked by Dr. Salmi in his presentation than I'm doing here. Looking at one of the other questions is how we, on the next slide, is how we create and foster such networks in such regions. As I've mentioned, the SHARE program has looked very closely at the studies around communities of practice and how we develop that, identifying common themes and purposes, engendering trust amongst different stakeholders, sharing that knowledge, be it tacit or otherwise, sharing best practices or even good practices, what works, what doesn't work, and then developing a collective intelligence that transcends national borders. This is really central to the work of higher education. It's something that we do in universities all the time, and this is how I believe universities can transcend national boundaries and as such develop closer links between regions and countries. So if we move on to the next slide, then I found the question on, do we need a differentiated internationalization strategy? And I'm borrowing heavily from Professor Hans de Wit here and his excellent work on internationalization, where there's the development or the potential development for an international framework. Context is really the key to this. And I think we need to understand, what is our own context? Who are we serving? Why do we want to internationalize? What benefit does it have in relation to our context? How then are we internationalizing our institution? What aspects, be it comprehensive or otherwise? And then the specific activities that lead to that. I think increasingly universities' role in addressing global problems, these wicked problems that face us now and will continue to emerge, that is essential. And I'm really looking forward to seeing much more engagement by universities in the SDGs. I'll just refer then to an excellent publication by Dr. Jamil on this and how universities engage on the SDGs. And then moving to, I think it's the final slide, but yes. I thought, again, a very interesting question. What place does Asia hold in the world with respect to education as soft power? You may be familiar with Professor Danny Quah. He was previously at LSE. He's now the Dean of the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy in Singapore. And he's done some really interesting work on the primacy of Asia and the increasing power of Asia. So as the world's economic center of gravity shifts ever inexorably, ever closer to Asia, and as the world's largest population, the world's tightest cluster of people is located in that red circle encompassing all of India as well, I'd point out, then Asia is the center of the world in terms of economy, in terms of development, and education being a very large part of those things. So ultimately, we see Asia taking the lead on education, and that's borne out by increasing numbers of students from around the world choosing Asia as a place to study. Okay, and I think we can just move to the final slide there. I'd like to thank you all very much for your attention. I'm looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Darren. Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing your experience with CHAIR and telling us about the activities of internationalization of higher education. I actually found your mention of context very, very meaningful. And of course, the fact that trust and sharing common concerns and transcending national boundaries, which you mentioned, are really very important. So thank you very much for joining us today and sharing your ideas with us. I've received a host of questions, and I think I will very quickly, before the session ends, take up some of these questions. My first question is to Dr. Jamil Salmi. Do you think that some challenges could arise in collaboration due to the difference in levels of internationalization of the various nations which are involved in the ASEAN and Southeast Asia? The levels of difference, the different levels of development of the nations involved. Would that cause any problems?
Indeed, it may cause. I maybe share an anecdote. As the America in Colombia for personal reasons, and I was asked by the major Colombian university to help them organize a trip to China. And it so happens that I have good relationship with the people who do the Shanghai ranking. And so I asked them, could you kindly set up an appointment between the University Vice Chancellor for Colombia and your university president? And they looked at me, they told me, sorry, Jamil, we'd love to help you, but that university in Colombia is not in the top 100, so our president will not have time for him or her. I think that's the bad side, but I think the good side is to remember that we can all learn from each other, no matter how advanced or less advanced. And I've seen many times that when you have traditional collaboration patterns, university from the north helping universities in the south, that when they are open-minded, they realize that the university from the north can learn a lot from university in the south, because the circumstances are much more difficult, much more challenging. They have to be much more, they have to find solutions without the resources that universities in the north may have. So I'm a big believer that you can have deep, what I call deep partnerships when two universities, I think the important thing is to share the same philosophy. No matter if you are at different levels of development, but if you have the same outlook on life, then you can build meaningful relationships where both parts learn from each other or learn together.
Thank you so much. Thank you. My next question is to Dr. Roger Chow. Going forward, do you see that the mode of service delivery in this part of the world changing from student mobility to other forms of collaboration or even a commercial presence of these universities overseas?
First and foremost, it has already happened. It has changed. There has been ongoing mobility of faculty, and there has been online delivery of courses and joint delivery. In China, there has been international branch campuses similar with Singapore, Malaysia, to a certain extent, Thailand. In fact, China, if I remember right, hosts the most number of IBCs, international branch campuses in the world today.
Yeah.
And these are not only one type, but it also includes Sino-foreign collaboration, Sino-foreign program collaboration, as well, aside from institutions. So there's a lot of things happening. There are talks not only in higher education in the notion of hyper-blended delivery, where students actually attend class, but some of them are actually attending it online. So this is something that we can look at, but there will be challenges. Probably easier at the higher education space, but primary for compulsory education, it will be more challenging. As such, I believe that it has already changed, and as with any trend, it will continue. As to how much it will drive the changes, we don't know. It depends on infrastructure developments of technology, and the buy-in from national policymakers and the funding that they provide. So, yeah, that's the only thing I can say. I'm not a fortune teller. Sorry.
Thank you. The next question is for Mr. Darren. You have worked in capacity building programs in ASEAN. Do you feel that the competitiveness between these nations could dilute regional collaboration? And has the exercise of harmonization been easy?
Very interesting
I'm sure not,
question.
but do share your experience with us.
Yeah, well, I will readily agree that it's not easy. I think any form of harmonization, I mean, some people would even challenge the use of the term harmonization as, well, is that an appropriate approach to a region such as ASEAN? I'm going to, I suppose, reflect on the very clear difference between the EU and ASEAN as regions. And Dr. Roger will be smiling in a moment now as I use this quote, because we were discussing it recently at the policy dialogue in Bangkok. There is a need to recognize that they're very different approaches. And a very dear colleague and expert from the ASEAN region, Dr. Supachai Yabaprabhas, who was a former executive director of the ASEAN University Network, and Simeo Raihead, would say that, and he used this analogy, that Europe is an orchestra and ASEAN is a jazz band. And I thought that was a really succinct way of describing the two regions, because in Europe, things happen at the center, and then, yes, everyone has their role, and they carry that out. In ASEAN, the idea of autonomy and non-interference between the member states is very clear. I think we've seen that play out in recent times, and that would then, I suppose, trickle down to the institutions. Competition is not as much a factor. I do think there's a great willingness amongst the ministries and also the governments to work together. So there is a lot of cohesion. There are differences, of course, in views on certain aspects, and that would be true of any region. It's the same is true in the EU. I mean, our tax regulations, for example, in Ireland, were called into question by some EU member states being a little bit too low. So, if we look at harmonisation on any level, be it on tax, on higher education, there will always be challenges. But I think as long as there's a willingness to collaborate and a willingness to come together as a community, then that will be half the battle. And we saw that in the EU, in the development of the Bologna process and the European higher education area.
Thank you. Very interesting. Very interesting. I have time for a couple more, if you're okay with that. Can I go ahead? A couple of more questions. I think I saw one here. That's for Dr. Jamil Salmi. Collaboration and mobilization of resources are dependent on economic development of the region. Will this be the biggest hindrance in scaling up East-East collaborations in the future?
Yes
economic
and no.
Development will, you need resources, right?
Yes, and especially, connectivity, I think has proven a very important barrier or enabler. But once you have connectivity, then you need, as my colleagues have mentioned, you don't need to travel physically to engage in meaningful interaction. You can do classes together, supervision of master and PhD students. You can do research collaboration. You can use remote labs. I just give you just one example. I have a brother-in-law who is a professor of robotics in Montreal, Canada. And he has in his lab a little piece of equipment called the rover, like this machine that they send to planet Mars. Mm-hmm. It costs $30 million. Which university in the South can afford, or even in the North, But through internet connection, students anywhere in the world can program an experiment, send the information to the robot in Canada and do the experiment. So I think that, yes, a minimum of resources in terms of good connectivity are important. And here the National Research and Education Networks, the NRENs, have become crucial. But if you have that, then the sky is the limit in terms of new forms of collaboration and internationalization.
Yeah, that's so true. I think resources, there's often a barrier in our minds that you need resources. But I think leveraging collaborations and networks can help you overcome that. And of course, technology helps us a lot with the way things are progressing now. For nations like East Asia or South Korea, with multiple regional memberships, is it possible that some regionalization schemes will have a priority over others? Will that create some kind of a conflict? You did mention very briefly that, it sometimes becomes confusing when they are part of so many collaborations.
Actually, that is a question I posed in my 2014 article in Higher Education. I said there are too many frameworks happening at different sub and even above ASEAN +3 and even Asia Pacific level. There is conflict to a certain extent, but it's not that bad. Sometimes conflicts creates impetus for further development and innovation. This is something I've learned over time, and especially when I'm working now at the ASEAN region, particularly in education. In fact, Darren can see that we actually managed to pull something that has never been done before in the region. We brought together all the key regional stakeholders and players in higher education and decided to work together. This has never been done. So in fact, things that may seem to be a challenge may actually be something that helps push innovation and harmonization and collaboration together.
Thank you.
So
thank you once again.
Look at it as a challenge.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you once again for being a very, very positive panel. I think the questions, you brought out the positive angle more than the difficulties. And I think that's really the secret of your success. Mr. Darren, your last slide on Asia becoming important. really makes us understand why this topic today was so very critical. Let me just end by thanking all the speakers for your time and for sharing your experiences. Of course, collaboration in higher education is naturally beneficial since discovering new or unexpected or alternative insights has always been the very aim of universities and academic discussions. And I'm sure we have very exciting and meaningful years ahead. Thank you so much to all of you. Thank you for joining us today and for being on this panel. Over to
Thank
you,
you for the
Madhvi.
invitation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madhvi. Madhvi, over to you.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for a symphony of thoughts which this session gave to us. And I now request Dr. Vidya to kindly thank our speakers.
So thank you, Jamil. I'm so glad to see you here. A very close friend and of course, someone who I really look up to. Professor Darren and Professor Chow. I think Professor Chow and I have been on some webinars together. But thank you so much for accepting our invitation. In fact, this was the first time when we really brought in ASEAN, for discussions in an educational platform like this. Though we had discussed ASEAN in an international relations conference in more of the, the diplomatic discussions that we had a few years ago. But I'm sure we can come together and work on many platforms that we spoke about right now. And Professor Jamil, I'm sure you're going to be happy mentoring us again, once again, and hope to see all of you next year physically at Symbiosis International University. And thank you, Professor Gupte, for a wonderful, session. It was really very interesting, and you had done your homework so well. It was like a wonderful prelude that you gave to the discussions.
No, I think, ma'am, it's all thanks to the wonderful speakers we had on the session. I think all of them had given us very, very different insights, and that was very valuable. Thank you once again, and we look forward to meeting you in person next year.
Thank you for the excellent moderation, Dr. Gupte, and it was a pleasure to join the panel today.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, looking forward to meeting all of you in person in the near future.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So with this, we come to the end of this engaging session. We will now take a break, and we will come back at around 4:30 p.m. Where we have a very special session organized where Dr. Vidya will be in conversation with Mr. Joe Johnson. So hope to see all of you in the next session. Stay safe and God bless. Thank you so much.